Welcome to the channel, and if you've been paying attention this week, welcome to part 3. This is our part 3 of our 7 Days of Pumpkinheads, and this one we're going to call It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. It should be fairly obvious what this title is a reference to. We're going to do a little bit of a take of the old Charles Shultz cartoon, one of my favorites from when I was a kid, and something I watched just about every year, including this year, just to kind of get prepared for this piece. Okay, now really quick, let me do the shameless plug. If you haven't done so already, get underneath that video, look for the subscribe button, click on it. Give me that chance to kind of come back into your world, show you some more videos. And of course, if you are not so opposed to doing so, hit that like button also. And of course, questions are always welcome in the comments. Okay, now if we talk a little bit about this drawing, just a little bit of a reminder. This was a drawing that I developed for a Jeopardy game I put together that had questions that were related to Halloween. In this particular case, the question was about the original Great Pumpkin cartoon, from back, when I was a kid. So the question was, who is it that Linus is waiting for in the pumpkin patch? And the answer would be the Great Pumpkin. Now, for this reason, I'm pointing this out for a very distinct reason. When we get to the end of the time lapse here, you're going to see that there's actually kind of two endings here. And it's because this drawing was used to present the question, who's Linus waiting for? And while that question was being presented, the people in the pumpkin patch with him were the Charlie Brown gang. We'll see them, the individual drawings of them in a little bit. But when the answer was revealed, we had to show the Great Pumpkin. And if you remember the cartoon, they never actually show you what the Great Pumpkin looks like. Sorry if there's any spoilers there. So I did have to kind of make up my own version of what I felt like the Great Pumpkin looked like, but in the same time trying to keep it as close to that Charles Shultz pumpkin peanuts kind of style as much as I could. So I made some judgment calls as to what I thought the Great Pumpkin might look like if he ever showed up in this Charlie Brown cartoon. You be the judge. I think I kind of nailed the style pretty well. So a little bit about the drawing here. Again, the idea was to mimic Charles Schultz's style. This is a lot of fun for me. This is actually how I learned to draw when I was a little kid growing up. Whenever I had an interest in something like a particular cartoon or comic book, I would grab blank paper and I would just sit there and try to copy the drawings as much as I could. The Peanuts were a great example of this. Garfield would be another one, and I've drawn a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in my day, I will tell you that. Now, Garfield is another great example of this. I grew up drawing Garfield as well. I'll put a card up here in the top corner here. Go ahead and give it a click. There is an old Garfield cartoon I did about a year or so ago. Made a little video of it. If you want to go check it out, again, go ahead and click on the link at the top there. Now, if we get back to this drawing here, remember the idea, again, is to mimic the Charles Schultz style. So it was these big, bold, kind of inked lines were really important to kind of get that cartoon-esque feel that I'm going for. When it comes time to draw the figures, it was something I kind of did separate. Each little figure got its own separate layer until I was happy that I'd matched the Charles Schultz style as much as I possibly could. And then ultimately I could kind of combine those layers together for coloring purposes a little bit later on. Now, one thing I had to kind of figure out here as I was going along is what characters I wanted to sit in the pumpkin patch with Linus in the beginning portion of this drawing. Really, the question I'm trying to ask is, do I put the Peanuts characters in there as we know them? Do I put in, the Charlie Brown and the Lucy and so on and so forth? Or do I put them in their Halloween costumes the way that we saw them in the cartoon? If you're not familiar with the cartoon, you may not necessarily recognize who these people are supposed to be because they're completely unrecognizable in their costumes. So it was really kind of a tough decision to make here. Do I go with the recognizable characters, or do I go with these random Halloween costumes and you really couldn't tell who they were? Ultimately, what I ended up deciding on is to go with the Halloween costumes. I just kind of felt it fit the piece a little bit more. But to help kind of drive home the idea that this was the Charlie Brown gang, so to speak, I included Snoopy along with them just to kind of help sell this idea that you should be familiar with who these characters are. If it helps, there's also direct references to the cartoon. So the ghost with all the holes in the sheets, that's Charlie Brown. He couldn't even make a ghost costume correctly. The witch and the goblin there, I'm not really sure who they were supposed to be, although I've always imagined that one of them was certainly Lucy. And then this ghost that you're seeing right here with all the scratchy lines over him, that's supposed to be the dirt of that character Pigpen. So again, hopefully that drives some memories for you a little bit there if you need a little bit of a reminder. And of course, again, we'll throw in Snoopy here as well, just to kind of round out the gang and really kind of sell this idea that it is, in fact, the gang that we're familiar with. All right. So once we kind of have the composition all together, then the next portion is to obviously go in and start doing some coloring and things like that. But notice how much I'm spending a little bit of time here on Snoopy. I really want to get the shape of his head right. And of course, for this, I did use some reference. So I used about 6 or 7 different reference pictures to try to get the lines right and the shapes right of all the heads and so on and so forth. I actually thought I'd struggle with Linus's head quite a bit, but believe it or not, it kind of came together pretty quick. And once the hair went in, any small imperfections were really kind of lost in that big tangle of hair that he has. Now, the coloring aspect of this is going to go pretty quick because there's not really going to be anything to speak of about shadow and light. This whole cartoon cell type style that we're going for doesn't lend itself to actually painting in those features like the shadows and the light, just because it never really appeared in the cartoon. So if I'm matching the style, I'm going to leave that out. Although there is some temptation to do that and just kind of make it a little bit more my own style. But again, I really wanted to kind of sell this idea that this was directly from the cartoon as close as I could. The one little piece of detail or artistic flair I did add to it, as you probably already can see, is the sky in the background. That's the only thing that really got some layers of paint to give a suggestion of some cloud, some mist, and then a glow on the moon. But everything else is basically going to get flat color underneath the ink lines, and then that's it. That's really all there is to it. So you can see that this is going to go in really quick because the easiest way to do the coloring was just to make a copy of my line work and then just do little quick color fills into the line work layer. And if I ever had to color over it, I had a copy of the initial line layer without any changes to it that I could always kind of put on top to hide any imperfections or anything like that. Last couple steps here, just basically putting some color variation into the leaves. In the original cartoon, these were very messy and not very contrasting in terms of colors. There was a lot of greens and yellows, and that was about it. But I tried to kind of, stick to something that I thought might give it a little bit more high def of a feel. Now remember, this final composition is what we see as the initial question. So once we got the question out of the way, the big reveal of what the Great Pumpkin looks like comes next. And that's the next phase of the drawing. I'm hiding the characters, and I'm hiding that background sky so I can kind of see what I'm drawing. And at this point, I'm just trying to figure out what this Great Pumpkin character is going to look like. Now, initially, I thought what I'd do is just make him look like the Merv game show host that you've seen in the couple of previous paintings that I did. But I ultimately shied away from that. I like drawing in that style, but it just something that really kind of stood out from the cartoony style of this Charles Shultz, feeling that we're going for. So I did try out a couple different poses. I tried out a couple different ways that I might want to render this character, but ultimately when it came down to it, none of it felt like it really fit inside the in the composition here. So eventually I settled on this idea that the Great Pumpkin would present himself with his arms outstretched, but we really needed to kind of mimic that peanut style as much as possible to get it to fit in the rest of the composition. So, the pumpkins and the rest of the pumpkin patch look almost like orange beach balls, and so I kind of try to get that similar flavor in there when I designed the pumpkin head on this character. And then when it came to the body and the tuxedo, what I did was I looked up an old Charlie Brown picture from a different cartoon, something I guess where he went to a dance or something like that, and he was wearing a tuxedo. So what I was able to do then is use that as a reference for how I wanted to draw in this body. Same thing, our Great Pumpkin's going to be wearing some sort of a tuxedo type outfit. And basically it was just a matter of kind of drawing Charlie Brown's body with a pumpkin head. And if you think about it, that's not all that far removed from what Charlie Brown looks like to begin with. It's just kind of a different face on that big round head. So, once you have a little bit of reference, this kind of goes in pretty quickly. A lot of the decision making is taken out of your hands there. So once that's done, the rest is about getting the inks in and getting in the colors, just like I did with all the characters prior to that. Now, one little artistic license that I kind of gave to myself was the stem that was on top of the pumpkin. Definitely not in that cartoony style that matches up with the rest of it, but I couldn't help myself. I really enjoyed drawing the stems on those pumpkin tops, and so I just kind of had my way with it a little bit. One last note here. You may notice that the moon has also changed sides. This just made more sense for the composition to get it out of the way of the pumpkin head, so that way the pumpkin wasn't blocking the view of that, work that I'd already kind of put into illuminating that sky. And since I didn't have to make any adjustments with shadows or lights or anything like that, it really was no big deal just to move around the moon to any place I kind of felt like it fit finally, just to kind of to give everything something of a balance on the page. Okay, so again, ink layers are going in right now. Notice the little kind of scribbly kind of looking mark that goes into the tie and the cummerbund. Very indicative of that cartoony Charles Schultz style that really kind of should sell the idea that I'm going for here. That's it. We're about done. So let's just take a little bit of a review here. This is what our question slide looks like. It says, who is Linus waiting for in the pumpkin patch? And then here's our reveal, the Great Pumpkin. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Remember, there's a couple more of these coming throughout the rest of the week, our 7 Days of Pumpkinheads. If you haven't subscribed, do so. Come on back, check out the rest. Hope to see you soon. Take care.